It is time for another emergency commitment episode here on the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I am your host, Lance Glinn. It is Friday, September 23rd. Four-star wide receiver Hykeem Williams, the fifth-ranked receiver in the country according to the 24/7 Sports rankings, out of Stranahan in South Florida, has decided to play his college football in his home state and commit to the Florida State Seminoles. Joining me to discuss Williams' decision and more is 24/7 Sports national recruiting analyst Andrew Ivins. Ivins, thanks so much for joining me. First and foremost, just what's your initial reaction to Williams choosing the Noles and deciding to play his college football at Florida State?
I think this is the biggest win of the Mike Norvell era, or one of the biggest. And I know I've said that a few different times when they've gotten some offensive linemen, and when he landed Travis Hunter last cycle, we thought that as well. Obviously, he didn't get Travis Hunter across the finish line, but here with Hykeem Williams, I think Hykeem wants to be at Florida State. I think that's the big reason why he committed to the Seminoles. He feels comfortable with that staff. He likes the atmosphere and the environment there in Tallahassee. So this is huge for FSU. I mean, it wasn't a few months ago I was kind of wondering what's going on with Florida State when it comes to recruiting. Why aren't they getting more involved in South Florida? Fast forward to now, they go down into Broward County. They go head-to-head with Texas A&M, Georgia, Miami, and others, and they pick up a commitment from one of the top pass catchers in the class of 2023. So good news for Mike Norvell, good sign for Florida State, and now they can kind of celebrate this one as they get geared up to play on Saturday night.
And for so long, Texas A&M was the crystal ball leader. Pittsburgh was also a school linked to him because of the relationship with Taekwon Underwood. He took an official visit to Georgia too. How were Mike Norvell and his staff able to gain momentum in this recruitment and ultimately land his commitment over the other schools I just previously mentioned?
I think it starts just kind of with that 3-0 start for the Seminoles. And you know, Hykeem visited Tallahassee in late July, and he got a chance to see FSU practice because they were a week 0 team. They started a little bit earlier than everyone else. They had an FCS opponent week 0. So Hykeem got to watch one or two practices, and he saw a team that was working very hard to turn things around heading into year 3 of that Mike Norvell era at Florida State. Then he goes to that neutral site game, FSU versus LSU there in New Orleans, and he's blown away by the performance by the Seminoles and really just how FSU was able to, take down the Tigers, take down an SEC opponent. So I think Florida State, that 3-0 start, all that momentum really helps. And I think he's just comfortable with that staff. Ron Dugans, Mike Norvell on that bye week for FSU. He flew down to Fort Lauderdale and went to Hykeem Williams' game. And I think the other thing that helped FSU is one of Hykeem's good friends, Omar Graham Jr., is a freshman linebacker for the Florida State Seminoles. FSU took him last cycle, and Omar has told Hykeem nothing but positives about what's going on up there in Tallahassee. So I think it's a combination of a bunch of things, but that 3-0 start for FSU definitely played a big role in this.
And when you look at Hykeem Williams and try to project him to the next level, do you think he's a guy that can get to Florida State next year early and make an impact? Or is he someone who maybe needs a year or so to develop his game more, maybe grow a little bit before really excelling for the Seminoles?
Well, Hykeem's a guy that really hasn't played a ton of football, and he's had Stranahan, which hasn't had a big-time recruit since like 1971. They haven't had an All-American since then. So it's not really a football factory, and this is a kid who grew up playing basketball. That's what everyone thought he was going to do at the next level, play hoops. Obviously, he never got to be 6'7" or 6'8", so he found the game of football, and he really excelled, and he's a freak athlete. He was on my freaks list. Underclassmen report has him as one of the highest speed markers in the class of 2023. He can hit 22.9 on their metric system. And he's a guy that can dunk the basketball, and he's just got a big frame. And I think if you're a Florida State fan, look at what Johnny Wilson did against Louisville. That's a big framed wide receiver. Hykeem, not as tall or long as Johnny Wilson, but I think Hykeem can play that role on the outside for the Seminoles, be a big play threat, get behind defenses, and he can also block. I mean, he's 6'3", 200 pounds. He's rocked up. His coach actually joked with me that he thinks Hykeem might blossom into a tight end one day if he doesn't stop eating, and we'll see. But I think maybe 1 or 2 years on campus, and then I would anticipate him being part of that rotation. And he's going to roll early. So that's going to get started pretty soon in January, him going through and getting acclimated to the Florida State football culture and what they do in that weight room.
So, Andrew, last one from me. Florida State, they are undefeated. Obviously, a big win earlier in the season against LSU. Where do they go from here in recruiting? They do have a top 20 class. They have a lot of momentum. This was a big year for Mike Norvell, and so far it's been so good. So now getting Hykeem Williams, what's next for the Seminoles in recruiting? Is their class almost done, or do they still have a couple more targets on board?
Lance Hykeem becomes commit number 16 for the Seminoles, and that moves them up to number 15 in the country. Again, if you told me a few months ago that Florida State would have the number 15 class here as we exit September, I would have thought you're crazy. But that's a testament to Mike Norvell and his staff. Just kind of, checking in with a few different sources. I think Florida State, they're not in a rush to take a bunch of high schoolers. If they're going to take anyone else right now, it's going to be guys that want to be at Florida State, guys that are football players, guys that have good football temperament, guys that want to win. I think Mike Norvell has developed a really good culture there at Florida State. We saw it a little bit in that Louisville game, a bunch of unsung heroes making plays, a bunch of program guys. But I wouldn't be surprised if they saved some of those counters for the transfer portal. Florida State has been as active as anyone in that secondary market. And I think Mike Norvell and his staff are going to continue to kind of chip away. One other thing I'll say, interested to see what else happens here for the FSU in South Florida. Damari Brown, a top 247 cornerback, he's indicated that he's probably going to visit Florida State. I think that's another guy with this 3-0 start that FSU has a better chance at. And then Conrad Hussey, same thing, a 4-star safety at St. Thomas Aquinas down there, right down the road from Hykeem Williams. He's someone that seems to be a bit more interested in FSU now that they're off to a 3-0 start. So I think they're going to keep the momentum going. I think this start helps them keep what they have committed, helps them get Hykeem in the boat. But I wouldn't be surprised if they save some of those spots for the transfer portal, because Mike Norvell has had a ton of success when it comes to getting those veterans.
Yeah, it's been so far so good for Mike Norvell in year 3. What was and what is a big year for him at Florida State. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So make sure to follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew_Ivins. And of course, for Andrew Ivins, I am Lance Glinn. Thanks for listening to the Football Recruiting Podcast as Hykeem Williams decides to stay home and play for the Florida State Seminoles.